I still remember the first time I laid eyes on Bennett, though in those days he was just Benny to everyone who knew him. We were both in our mid-20s, two fresh-faced hopefuls, fumbling our way through life in a cramped city. He was charming in a scruffy, warm-hearted way. He had a habit of blowing his bangs out of his eyes when he talked. The first time we met was at a mutual friend's birthday party. Him in an ill-fitting blazer, me in an off-shoulder dress that was neither fancy enough nor casual enough, and both of us feeling like fish out of water. In hindsight, I should have noticed the details. The scuffed shoes he couldn't afford to replace, the gauntness around his cheeks that suggested he'd been skipping meals to save a buck. But at the time, it was all part of his appeal. He made me laugh with a wry observation about how the birthday girl's tapas spread was basically just crackers and cheese that most of us could barely afford in our paychecks. We bonded over how we were both trying so hard to make it, yet never seemed to have enough for groceries when the rent check cleared. That night, we ended up on the small balcony of my friend's apartment, overlooking a narrow alley. For over an hour, we shared stories about our childhoods. His single mom, who worked 3 jobs, my big family in the Midwest who'd scrimped and saved for me to attend college. He told me about his dream of one day running a successful business. Didn't matter what kind, he joked, he just wanted to be the boss of something. He looked out at the city lights as if they were a field of open doors, just waiting for him to walk through. I felt a tug in my chest for him. Something about his ambition and raw sincerity made me want to help. So, when he walked me back inside and offered to drive me home, using his beat-up old sedan that threatened to break down at every turn, I said yes. Over the next few weeks, we found ourselves texting constantly. He'd ask about my day. I'd ask him how his job hunt was going. He worked odd gigs, bartending, cleaning offices, anything to piece together enough for rent. We started dating officially after 2 months of spontaneous coffees and cheap takeout meals. I was the one who had a slightly steadier paycheck, having recently landed an entry-level marketing role at a small firm. Bennett always felt self-conscious about my covering dinners, but he never rejected it outright. Instead, he'd look at me with grateful eyes, promising that one day he'd repay me tenfold, that he was just in a rough patch. I believed him wholeheartedly. I admired his hustle, the way he kept trying new part-time roles, his unwavering optimism that something big was right around the corner. As time passed, we merged our lives more. He moved into my tiny studio to save on rent, and though it was cramped, we made it work. I got used to the rhythmic hum of him coming home late after bartending shifts, or the early mornings when he left to do odd construction jobs. We're a team, I used to tell him, bandaging up his bruised knuckles after a shift hauling boxes. I've got you if you've got me. He always promised he did. And I believed it. Why wouldn't I? We had nothing but each other and these big, scary dreams. Years started to fly by. I climbed up the ranks at my marketing job, eventually securing a more stable salary. Bennett started taking business classes online, certain that was the ticket to something better. Whenever he felt discouraged, I'd remind him of his potential. Over cheap wine and discount pizza, we'd vow that someday we'd look back and laugh at these hardships from the deck of our own suburban home. People warned me from time to time. My friends would say, "Isn't it tough carrying him financially? Or doesn't it bother you that you're paying the bills?" I'd always wave them off. I wasn't naive. I knew it was a strain. But I believed in him. I loved the man I saw late at night, meticulously studying business strategies, determined to break the cycle of poverty. I had no way of knowing how this faith in him would be repaid. In my idealistic heart, I saw Bennett as a future success story, not a cautionary tale. If I'd realized then what I know now, that sometimes the kindest among us become stepping stones for people who see nothing but their own ambition, I might have spared myself the heartbreak that was coming. But life isn't that simple. Love certainly isn't. And the future we both envisioned was about to careen off the rails in ways I never imagined possible. By the time we hit our early 30s, Bennett and I had weathered more storms than I thought possible. We moved 3 times, chasing slightly better living situations each move. I got promoted twice, eventually earning a comfortable living as a marketing manager with a small team under me. Bennett? Well, he had a roller coaster of attempts. Small e-commerce stores that never quite took off, short-lived partnerships, even a foray into real estate that left him with nothing but frustration. Despite all the ups and downs, our bond seemed solid. We'd argue over finances sometimes. I'd cover the rent one month, he'd promise to pay me back when the next deal closes. But those deals rarely closed. Still, I kept believing. Maybe I was too loyal for my own good, or maybe I just couldn't stand the thought that all my emotional and financial investment in him might go to waste. Looking back, I was too committed to see the red flags. The proposal itself came during our 10th year together. We were both 35, and though some of my girlfriends teased me about the eternal boyfriend, I tried not to let it get to me. Then, one night, after a modest dinner at our favorite Thai restaurant, Bennett pulled out a ring. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple gold band set with a small diamond, but I cried from happiness. He looked sincere, even teary-eyed, as he told me he couldn't picture life without me. He apologized for not proposing sooner, said he wanted to get his finances in order before he took that step. I said yes without hesitation. To me, it was the culmination of all those years we'd stuck it out together. We were each other's best friend, each other's cheerleader. I imagined we'd have a simple, beautiful wedding and settle into a shared life of quiet comfort. No more hustle, no more financial strain. It felt like we were at the threshold of a new era. But life continued to throw curveballs. We both got busier, me with my marketing firm, him with whatever new scheme he had going on at the time. Weeks blurred into months. We set a wedding date, then postponed it when Bennett's father fell ill. Another year passed. We started discussing how we might want an intimate, maybe even a courthouse ceremony, less financial burden, more about us. Yet the date kept sliding. I was so enamored with the dream that I ignored the creeping sense that something was off. Over the years, Bennett's ambition had twisted. It was no longer about building a stable life together. It was about striking gold. He became secretive about his ventures. He'd turn his laptop away if I came into the room, or hush phone calls the moment I stepped within earshot. Whenever I asked, he'd say it was nothing, or too boring, or too early to talk about. The more I pressed, the more defensive he got. "Don't you trust me?" he'd ask, deflecting with a wounded tone. "I'm doing all this for our future, you know." He was particularly jumpy about finances. He'd promised me that his next project would give him more than enough money to pay for the wedding of my dreams. I never pushed him about the details. Maybe I was afraid to. Maybe I wanted so desperately to believe that my years of supporting him would finally pay off. Still, my gut nagged at me. He'd leave at odd hours, claiming to meet investors. His phone would light up with messages he refused to explain. And the money, which was always scarce, suddenly started showing up in small lumps. A few thousand here, a couple thousand there, enough to placate me but not enough for a full accounting. Where was it coming from? He'd wave away my questions with a grin. "Just side deals," he'd say, "small stepping stones to the big one." 13 years we'd been together. 13. We'd gone from broke 20-somethings to, well, apparently me being a stable professional with a fiancé still chasing the big score. Friends started openly questioning me about it. "Are you sure he's the one?" they'd say. "What's he even doing for money?" I always defended him. Always, because I'd seen his kindness, his sincerity in earlier years. But sincerity alone can't sustain a relationship when secrets build. And oh, did they build. I dismissed the tension, forced a smile whenever someone asked when the wedding date would finally stick. Meanwhile, the unspoken weight pressed down on me, whispering that something was about to break. I just never expected how violently it would snap. He ended it on a Tuesday. Not a romantic Friday or a dramatic weekend blowout, just an ordinary workday. I was at my office, swamped with project deadlines, when a text buzzed on my phone. "We need to talk tonight. About us." My heart stuttered. Immediately I thought, is he finally going to set a wedding date? Or is he backing out? A creeping sense of dread filled me for reasons I couldn't pinpoint, but I told myself it was probably just cold feet. That evening, I walked through our front door, half expecting to see him waiting with candles, or maybe a serious expression. Instead, I found him calmly packing his suitcase in the living room. No conversation, no explanation, just meticulously folding clothes and placing them into the cheap luggage we'd bought years ago. Bennett? My voice sounded small. What's going on? He looked up, paused as though he were trying to recall a line in a play. Then he exhaled heavily. I'm leaving, he said matter-of-factly. The wedding's cancelled. My throat tightened. Cancel the wedding? But we've been engaged for 3 years. We were just... I couldn't finish. My mind was a swirl of half-formed thoughts. Why? He walked over to the sofa, sat down, and gestured for me to join him. I stayed where I was. His gaze slid from my eyes to the floor. Listen, he began, this isn't easy, but I'm not happy anymore. I feel trapped. You and we've been stuck for so long, and... Stuck? I interrupted, my voice rising. I've been supporting you for over a decade. We've been building a life. He had the nerve to shrug. That's the thing. I'm done with the building phase. I want to actually live. And the truth is, we're just different people now. A pause. Then quietly, you're older now, older than I want for the future I see. I felt his words sink into my skin, each one stinging like a hornet. Older than he wants. I was 38, still young by most standards, and we'd been together for 13 years. Suddenly the blood roared in my ears. My eyes brimmed with tears, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. He interpreted my silence as permission to continue. Look, I've got a new opportunity, he said vaguely, and it's gonna change everything for me. I need freedom to pursue it fully. I can't keep playing house waiting for you to slow me down. I stared at him. Did he just say I slow him down? After I spent years paying his bills, covering his rent, loaning him money for business classes? My anger flared. All those times I covered for you, I said, voice trembling. All the sacrifices, and you claim I'm the one holding you back? He had the gall to look sheepish, but no remorse came. I appreciate everything you did, but it's time for me to move on. He stood, picking up his suitcase. I'll send for the rest of my stuff. Don't worry, I won't leave you hanging on the rent or anything. Don't bother, I snapped. I can handle rent on my own. Always have. The bitterness in my tone was thick enough to choke on. He hesitated, then stepped toward the door. Good luck, he said softly, as if that small politeness could erase the callousness of what he'd just done. Then he walked out. My legs wobbled and I sank onto the couch, too stunned to cry. He'd left me. After 13 years, after everything I gave him, and he had the audacity to say I was too old. When I finally gathered myself enough to move, I noticed something strange on the kitchen counter. My wallet, open. He must have taken money out before leaving. Indeed, my credit card was gone. Fury and confusion wrestled inside me. He better not be siphoning my bank accounts. I rushed to my laptop to check my finances. Sure enough, he'd withdrawn a few thousand from our joint wedding fund. Not a massive fortune, but enough to prove he had zero intention of leaving me unscathed. An eerie calm settled over me. It was as though a switch had flipped in my brain, turning off the heartbreak and turning on a cold focus. I wanted answers, and I wanted justice. I resolved, right then and there, to find out exactly what opportunity he'd left me for. Because something about his entire demeanor screamed secret, and if he thought he could use me for over a decade, then skip away without consequences, he was sorely mistaken. I spent that night numb, recalling every past conversation, every sign I'd ignored, every suspicious phone call he'd hushed. Soon enough, I would discover the truth, and I knew it would be bigger, uglier than I dared imagine. I spent the next week juggling heartbreak with detective work. My first step was to cancel all shared accounts. Over the years, we'd set up a few combined funds for groceries and bills, but I'd always been mindful enough to keep my main finances separate. I was grateful for that now. Still, it pained me to see the small amounts he'd siphoned out. An ATM withdrawal here, a miscellaneous expense there. The joint wedding fund was nearly drained. Funny how it had never actually gone toward any wedding-related costs. Then I combed through the credit card statements. He'd been using one of my secondary cards on small purchases, nothing that flagged immediate suspicion. Takeout dinners, rideshare trips, a handful of online orders. But I found a cluster of strange charges at odd intervals. Cloud Hosting Pro, Encrypted Solutions Ltd, Storage Warehouse LLC. Each one was a monthly subscription or rental, never more than a couple $100. I'm in marketing, not law enforcement, but I can follow a paper trail. Over the next few days, I created a spreadsheet, noting the exact dates and amounts of each recurring charge. I discovered that, starting about a year ago, Bennett had systematically added these lines to my card. They were overshadowed by our usual expenses, cleverly spaced out so as not to raise alarm. But in total, it was a few $1,000s worth of something suspicious. A quick online search revealed that these companies provided secure data store, cloud, encryption, and private logistics solutions. Not exactly the sort of thing a typical budding entrepreneur might need, unless he was hiding something. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe he was running an illegal download site, or dealing with black market goods, or laundering money. Whatever it wasn't legitimate. I had a strong hunch his new opportunity was knee-deep in wrongdoing. I took my findings to my closest confidant, Jana, a longtime friend. She was a legal assistant at a reputable firm and had a knack for calling out nonsense. We met at a busy cafe so no one would overhear us easily. After I laid out the details, she whistled low. "This is bigger than a casual side hustle," she said. "You think he's involved in something criminal?" I sipped my coffee, the bitterness aligning with my mood. "I don't want to assume, but it certainly looks shady. It's like he's paying for covert services, storage, encryption, privacy. Why else hide it?" Jana's face hardened. "If you have evidence he's using your card for illegal activity, you could go straight to the police." I chewed on my lip. I only have the paper trail showing the charges, no proof of the contents. For all I know, he's just paranoid about business data, but my gut says otherwise. After some back and forth, we decided on a plan. I would keep digging, quietly, carefully. Jana offered to poke around in legal databases, see if there were any recent arrests or investigations that aligned with the subscription services Bennett was using. Meanwhile, I changed the password on my credit card account and reported potential unauthorized usage. The bank launched an internal inquiry, though they warned me it could take weeks or months. The heartbreak I should have been feeling, the sense of betrayal and tears, was overshadowed by an almost professional curiosity. My love for Bennett had burned away, replaced by a cold desire for the truth. "You think I'm too old?" I wanted to scream. "I gave you the best years of my life, and you repay me by lying, stealing, and leaving me for some pipe dream?" Late one night, I received an email notification. Bennett had tried, and failed, to log into the credit card account. The email stated the account had been locked temporarily. That same evening, I got a text from him. "You changed all our passwords. I couldn't access the joint card. What's going on?" I almost laughed at the absurdity. "What's going on?" He left me, emptied the wedding fund, and now wonders why I changed the passwords. The nerve. I ignored the text, my heart pounding with anger. If he wanted to talk so badly, maybe he should have asked me that night. He walked out with a suitcase. The next morning, Jana called with an update. "I found something interesting," she said. "A guy was arrested in a neighboring county for operating a crypto mining farm using stolen resources. But that's not quite what we're looking at. Another was busted for smuggling electronics. Still not quite. I did find a mention of an ongoing FBI probe into unauthorized data leaks. Could be anything at this point." It wasn't the slam dunk I hoped for, but it reminded me that such cases existed, and that people like Bennett might be teetering on that line. I needed more. If I could somehow get into that Storage Warehouse LLC facility, or figure out what files he was uploading to Cloud Hosting Pro, I might find the smoking gun. An opportunity came unexpectedly. One day, I received a shipping notification in my email, addressed to Bennett at my home address, confirming a locker rental extension at Storage Warehouse LLC. The order included a digital access code. He must have forgotten to change his contact info, or perhaps the system auto-filled with my email. Either way, it was the break I needed. That weekend, I drove to the warehouse with the code in hand. The place looked deserted, a single-story building with row upon row of metal units. My heart hammered as I punched in the digital code at the gate, fully expecting it to reject me. Instead, the gate buzzed open, letting me into the building. I found the locker number. My palms were sweaty as I keyed in the second code. The little screen beeped, and the door slid open. Inside was a metal shelf stacked with large plastic bins, each sealed and labeled with cryptic initials. A stale smell hung in the air. Dust, plastic, secrecy. I carefully pried the lid off one bin. Nestled inside were documents, pages and pages of legal-looking forms, bank statements, and spreadsheets. I skimmed one set of papers. They detailed money transfers from accounts I didn't recognize, all under obscure company names. Some had large sums, thousands upon thousands of dollars, moving in and out at dizzying rates. My stomach twisted. This was no innocent side hustle. Bennett was dealing with serious sums of money, possibly from multiple clients or sources. Next to the documents were small black devices, hard drives or USB sticks I couldn't tell. Something told me these might be backups of even more incriminating information. A chill ran through me. Whatever he was involved in, it was significant. I took photos of the key pages with my phone, my hands shaking. I felt both terrified and vindicated. The man who claimed I was too old and holding him back was knee-deep in something illegal. And he'd used my credit card to hide his tracks. The pure gall left me speechless. As I locked the unit and slid the door shut, I swore to myself I'd see this through. No matter how much it hurt, no matter how dangerous it might get, I wouldn't let Bennett get away with building a criminal empire off my back, then discarding me like outdated furniture. If that meant turning him in, so be it. That night, I barely slept. My mind buzzed with the knowledge of those documents, the bizarre transactions, the potential scale of Bennett's wrongdoing. I tried to talk myself down, reasoning that maybe it was all some elaborate but legitimate arrangement. Yet I knew better. My gut told me that no honest business needed clandestine storage lockers under shell company names. My initial plan was to gather more evidence before going to any authorities. But as the days dragged on, something inside me hardened. Bennett's betrayal, his cruel words, the theft, his entire sense of entitlement, simmered into a thirst for retribution. Not just justice. I wanted him to feel as cornered and helpless as I'd felt for 13 years, supporting him while he snuck around behind my back. I confided in Jana, who tried to keep me level-headed. "Let's get a lawyer's perspective," she urged. "We don't want to do anything rash that could compromise a potential case." I agreed, reluctantly. She introduced me to an attorney friend, Miriam, who specialized in financial crimes. I laid out the evidence, the credit card statements, the storage locker photos, the incomplete leads. Miriam whistled. "It's quite a puzzle," she said, "but enough of a red flag that law enforcement could open a file." "And what would they need from me?" I asked, trying to maintain a calm facade, though my stomach churned. "Details, timelines, any direct connection that ties him to wrongdoing. Right now we have digital footprints and suspicious documents, but we need something that proves criminal intent. Also, is any of that money traceable to illegal sources? Or is he just evading taxes?" I rubbed my temples. I'm not sure, but the sums look way too large for a typical side hustle. And I found references to some offshore accounts. Miriam nodded gravely. "Then it's definitely worth flagging, but be cautious. If he catches wind, you're snooping, he could hide the evidence, or worse." Worse. That possibility haunted me. The Bennett I used to know was never violent, just opportunistic. But people can change when backed into a corner. Still, I pressed on. Over the next 2 weeks, I devised a more concrete plan with Jana and Miriam's guidance. We'd compile everything into a neat package: timelines, screenshots, transaction histories, photos from the storage locker, and deliver it to the authorities. Before that, though, I wanted to see if I could gather more direct proof, something that would make law enforcement sit up and take action immediately. Fate handed me an unexpected opportunity. Out of the blue, Bennett texted me. "Hey, can we meet? I need to talk about some loose ends. It's important." My pulse jumped. Loose ends, indeed. For a moment, I considered ignoring him. But curiosity, and a chance for more intel, overrode my pride. "Fine. Tomorrow at noon. The cafe on 5th. He agreed. The next day, I arrived early at the cafe and picked a table near the back, one with a clear view of the entrance. I wanted to observe him, see if he acted paranoid if he was looking over his shoulder. He showed up wearing nicer clothes than I remembered. Fitted slacks, a crisp button-down. He'd trimmed his beard, too. He looked confident, almost arrogant, yet there was a pinch of tension in his eyes when he spotted me. He slid into the seat across from me, lips pressed into a tight line. "Thanks for meeting," he said. "Look, I'll cut to the chase. The wedding fund is gone, and I know you're probably upset." He paused, as though waiting for me to explode. But I kept quiet, my face neutral. He continued, I need you to sign some papers releasing me from liability for that account. It was in your name, so the bank is giving me trouble about returning the money I took. If you sign a statement saying I was authorized to withdraw, I cut him off. You have some nerve. You want me to lie to the bank to help you? He had the gall to look exasperated. It's not a lie, exactly. I was a co-owner, right? We both put money in. Anyway, I need your help because I can't keep dealing with this legal headache. I have big plans in motion, and everything is time-sensitive. He used to be better at reining in his arrogance, but now it practically oozed out of him. Big plans, I repeated. Yeah, I heard. Is that why you used my card for random storage and encryption services? His eyes flickered, a brief panic. He tried to mask it. I told you I have new business ventures. You told me nothing, I snapped. But I'm finding out plenty, and I'm done with your nonsense. He stiffened. What do you mean, finding out plenty? I took a slow breath. I know about the storage locker, Bennett. The documents, the suspicious bank transfers, the offshore references. Ring any bells? His face went pale, then shifted into anger. You had no right. I slammed a palm on the table, startling the couple behind us. No right? My voice shook with suppressed fury. After 13 years of my support, you think I have no right to know you're involved in something illegal? That you used my finances to hide your shady dealings? We locked eyes, the tension thick as fog. Then, all at once, he tried a different tack, an attempt to soften me. Listen, he said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. It's not what you think. I'm not some big criminal. I just found a way to make money quickly, some foreign clients, some hush-hush transactions. Everybody does it in certain circles. I never intended to drag you into it. I almost laughed. He sounded like a child caught stealing candy, insisting everyone does it. In that moment, I realized something profound. The man I once loved was gone. Or maybe he was never real, and this was who he truly was. A con man skirting the edges of the law, using people to get ahead. I leaned in, meeting his gaze. You want me to sign your papers? Fine, here's my condition. You pay me back everything you owe, every dollar you ever took from me, plus interest. I lied about a figure I'd never precisely calculated, but I named a huge sum. His eyes flared. That's ridiculous. I don't owe you. I cut him off again. You owe me for rent, for the wedding fund, for the credit card charges, for the emotional stress of 13 wasted years. And if you don't pay, I'll call the cops. I'll tell them everything, show them everything. His jaw clenched. For a second, I feared he might lash out physically, but he just shook his head. You wouldn't dare. I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. Try me. I rose from my seat. You have 1 week to decide. After that, I make my move. I left him there, fuming in the cafe. My legs shook as I walked out, but inside I felt a grim sense of power. Finally, after years of playing caretaker, I was dictating the terms. Little did he know, though, I'd already decided. The second I finished compiling the evidence, I was going to turn it over. No matter what hush money he came up with, I wanted him to face the legal consequences of his actions. It was bigger than money now. It was about seeing a manipulator undone by his own lies. The next morning, I expected to wake to a flood of frantic texts or calls from Bennett, either begging me to reconsider or spewing threats. Instead, my phone stayed silent. I felt a mix of relief and foreboding. Why wasn't he panicking? Jonna dropped by my apartment that afternoon with coffee and a stack of legal documents from Miriam. We're almost ready to go, she announced. Just a few more details to finalize, and we can present this to the authorities. I nodded, taking the coffee with a trembling hand. I told him I'd give him a week, but honestly, I don't care. I want him behind bars. She gave me a sympathetic smile. I get it, but better to have our T's crossed, I's dotted. Once we do this, it's out of our control. Her words rang true. Once I reported him, the case would be in the hands of law enforcement. I had no idea how long it might take, or what deals Bennett could strike if he turned in bigger fish. But at least he'd be forced to answer for his crimes. That evening, as I prepared dinner for one in my suddenly quiet apartment, my phone chimed. I have the money. Name a place and time. My heart raced. He's claiming to have the money, just like that. I couldn't help but be suspicious. But if he did, I wanted to see how far he'd go. I texted back, tomorrow noon, Waterfront Park, public place. You come alone. He replied with a curt, Fine. I stared at the word, my mind swirling with possibilities. Was this a trap? Did he plan to threaten me into silence? Or maybe he was truly desperate to bury the hatchet before I exposed him. I barely slept that night. Memories of our relationship flooded my mind. Little snapshots of our younger selves, so hopeful. Now, all that remained was bitterness and a looming sense of danger. I clutched my phone under the covers, listening to every creak in my apartment. The next day was overcast, fitting for the dark business at hand. I arrived at Waterfront Park early, scanning the area for any sign of Bennett or an ambush. A few joggers, a mom pushing a stroller, an older man feeding pigeons. No suspicious characters. I waited near a bench, overlooking the gray waters. Eventually, Bennett's figure emerged from behind a cluster of trees. He wore a black leather jacket and dark jeans, looking more like a gangster than the wannabe businessman I once knew. He approached me slowly, both hands shoved into his pockets. I kept my posture tense, ready to run or call for help if needed. He stopped a few steps away, glancing around warily. "You alone?" he asked, voice low. I nodded. "Of course." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a white envelope. "This is 10,000, he said flatly. "All I could get on short notice. If that's not enough, you'll have to wait." I felt a jolt of anger. 10,000? You owe me far more than that. He shrugged. "That's all I have in cash right now. Take it or leave it. You drop this entire thing and sign that statement, then we both move on." I looked down at the envelope, lips curling in disgust. "Bennett, you think I spent 13 years propping you up just for 10 grand? I stepped closer, hissing so only he could hear. "This is bigger than money now. You're involved in serious crimes, and I'm done covering for you." His expression darkened. "I told you, it's not that serious. Some questionable transactions, sure, but do you really want to ruin my life over it?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, now you're worried about your life being ruined? What about mine, after you walked out and called me too old to be part of your future?" I jabbed a finger at his chest, voice trembling with rage. "You used me, my money, my kindness, and now you're hiding behind shady deals. I don't care how much you want to pay me off. I'm not letting you off the hook." His face flickered between anger and desperation. He shoved the envelope at me again. "Just take it, damn it. We can negotiate more later. Don't go to the cops." I crossed my arms, unmoving. "I'm going to the cops, Bennett. If I were you, I'd start preparing a decent legal defense." I turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm. "Wait," he pleaded, voice raw. "If you do that, it'll destroy any chance I have of a normal life. I'll be blacklisted from every business circle, everything I worked for." "Worked for?" I spat. "You mean scammed for. Let go of me." He loosened his grip, face contorting. For a moment I thought I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "Please," he whispered. "I swear I'll make it right. I'll pay you back every cent, and then some." "I'll." He stopped, realizing I was unmoved. I shook my head. Too little, too late. Then I turned and strode away, leaving him standing with the envelope in hand. I didn't want his blood money. If he was expecting me to be that naive girl who once covered his every bill, he'd come to the wrong place. This time, the outcome would be on my terms. I rendezvoused with Jana and Miriam that evening in Miriam's modest office. The blinds were closed and the overhead lights buzzed softly. I brought copies, physical and digital, of everything I'd compiled. The locker documents, the spreadsheets, the suspicious transactions, the partial recordings of my recent conversations with Bennett. Miriam spread them out across her desk, eyebrows raised. "This is quite the trove," she said. "How'd you get it?" I explained about the storage locker, the digital receipts, and my interactions with Bennett. Jana blew out a breath. He practically confessed. Maybe not in precise terms, but enough to show he's desperate to hide illegal activity. Miriam nodded. "I think we have enough to at least prompt an investigation." "Are you sure about this? Once we bring it to law enforcement, you can't take it back." I glanced at Jana, then at the pile of evidence. "I'm sure. He's gotten away with too much for too long. I want him held accountable." She handed me a pen, indicating where I needed to sign the formal statement. My hand shook only slightly as I wrote my name, finalizing the affidavit about Bennett's suspicious financial dealings and unauthorized use of my card. When I set the pen down, a strange calm washed over me. This was it. The moment I sealed Bennett's fate. "I'll forward this to my contact in the Financial Crimes Division," Miriam said. It might take time, could be weeks or months before they act. But eventually, they'll gather enough for an arrest. I nodded, a flicker of worry crossing my mind. What if he flees, or tries to hide evidence? She shrugged. We can't control his movements, but the authorities can freeze his known assets if they have probable cause. They'll do their part. That night, as I drove home, the city lights blurred. My emotions tangled into a complicated knot of triumph, sadness, and anxiety. Part of me still remembered the sweet, broke dreamer I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Another part felt a grim satisfaction, certain this was the only way to restore balance to the scale he'd tipped so cruelly. Days passed, then weeks, and life settled into a strange routine. Bennett texted me sporadically, swinging between apologies and threats. I never replied, only forwarding each new message to Miriam. I kept an eye on the storage locker, which remained rented in his name, though he'd removed my credit card by then. He must have realized I had access and probably moved or destroyed more incriminating items. But we had enough evidence already. At the same time, small changes rippled through my personal life. Freed from the weight of supporting Bennett, I found I had more resources, both emotional and financial, to invest in myself. I spruced up my apartment, traveled to visit old college friends, even started taking yoga classes to clear my head. Oddly enough, the heartbreak I expected to drown me never did. It was as if the finality of his betrayal had severed my old illusions. My heart felt bruised, but not shattered. I held no illusions that this revenge would be clean or free of complications. Legal battles rarely are. But the knowledge that I wasn't helpless anymore filled me with a quiet determination. My phone calls with Jana were no longer frantic vent sessions. They were updates about how my life was improving in Bennett's absence. Then, about 6 weeks after I'd filed my statement, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I said hesitantly. "Is this Miss Olivia Hastings?" A firm male voice asked. "Yes, this is Agent Carson from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We received materials related to a Mr. Bennett Grayson, and I'd like to ask you a few questions. We have an active investigation in progress." My heart lurched. "Of course, whatever you need." He explained that they'd opened a case file on Bennett after noticing suspicious patterns in certain bank accounts. My documents had helped connect the dots. They suspected Bennett was part of a network funneling money offshore, possibly tied to narcotics profits or other illicit trades. My mind spun. Narcotics money? Had Bennett sunk that far? Agent Carson asked if I could come in for an official interview. We arranged a time, and he politely thanked me. I hung up, stunned. My fiancé of 13 years, the man who once cried when I bought him dinner because he felt guilty, was now entangled in a high-stakes criminal network. The reality hit me hard. This wasn't just petty theft or tax evasion. He was in serious trouble, and I was the one who provided the evidence to bring him down. Am I doing the right thing? The question fluttered through my mind, but I had no doubt. He'd made his choices that hurt me and possibly countless others. I'd do my part to see it through. My formal interview with the FBI was nerve-wracking. I sat in a sterile conference room, harsh fluorescent lights overhead, Agent Carson and another agent, Agent Morales, asking me detailed questions about every transaction, every suspicious detail, every memory I had of Bennett's money dealings. How long did you notice these offshore references? Did he ever mention associates by name? Were any large sums transferred to your personal accounts? On and on it went. I answered truthfully, handing over backups of the documents. I had meticulously highlighted relevant sections, courtesy of Jana's organizational skills. Agent Morales scribbled notes. "This lines up with intel we've been gathering for months," she said. "Your ex-fiancé may be a smaller cog in a larger operation. We're still connecting the dots." Ex-fiancé? The term stung, but it was accurate. Bennett had left me, canceled our wedding, basically declared me irrelevant. Now he was just some suspect in a major investigation. I felt an odd sadness. So many years, so much potential, wasted. The agents thanked me profusely, emphasizing the importance of my contribution. "We can't promise immediate action," Agent Carson said, "but rest assured we're actively pursuing leads. You might be called to testify if this goes to trial." I left the FBI office feeling drained, but resolute. If they needed me in court, I'd be there. If it meant seeing justice served, I'd stand up and repeat every damning detail I knew about Bennett. A month later, the call finally came. Bennett had been arrested. The FBI and local law enforcement swooped in on a business warehouse he was using as a front. They seized computers, documents, everything. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree with texts from Jaina, even a few from old acquaintances who'd heard the news. "Looks like your ex just got cuffed," one read. I stared at the news article covering the bust, my heart pounding. The piece mentioned multiple arrests in connection with a money laundering scheme, including one Bennett Grayson. A wave of vindication washed over me. He's counting his days now, I thought. He would sit in a holding cell, or maybe out on bail, but the weight of the law would hang over him. A strange mixture of sorrow and triumph gripped me. I never imagined the man I once loved would end up in jail, or that I'd be the one to seal his fate. Yet here we were. My phone buzzed with a restricted number. I hesitated, then answered. A familiar voice crackled through. "You set me up," Bennett's voice. Raw, angry, and frantic. "How could you do this to me?" My chest tightened. "Don't call this number again, Bennett. Any contact you make can and will be forwarded to the authorities." I hung up without waiting for his response. My hand shook as I placed my phone face down on the table. Bennett's criminal case moved through the court system with the glacial pace of legal proceedings. From what I could gather, he initially tried to plead ignorance, claiming he had no idea the money came from illegal sources. But the FBI had troves of digital evidence tying him to the network, including accounts he'd set up in foreign countries. I was subpoenaed to give a statement in a deposition. Miriam sat beside me, occasionally nodding. I told them everything. My 13-year relationship with Bennett, the suspicious transactions, how I found the documents, the confrontation at the cafe. My voice quavered in parts, but I stayed strong. His defense attorney tried to paint me as a bitter ex seeking revenge, but the evidence was too overwhelming. The FBI had my back, confirming that my data had been crucial to cracking open a larger operation. That day in court, I saw Bennett for the first time since his arrest. He sat at a defense table, looking gaunt and tired, wearing a cheap suit that dwarfed him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. There was no dramatic showdown, no last-minute plea for forgiveness. He was just a man pinned under the weight of his own choices. Within months, a plea deal emerged. I heard from the grapevine that Bennett named other associates, hoping to reduce his sentence. That stung. He was always quick to sell out whomever if it saved his own skin. Ultimately, he received a multi-year prison sentence, though not as long as it could have been if he'd gone to trial and lost. The final sentencing hearing was almost anticlimactic. I was there, quietly sitting in the back, listening as the judge read the terms. Then it was over. The bailiff led him away. He never glanced my way. Afterward, I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. A sense of finality settled over me, like exhaling after holding your breath too long. 13 years of my life, tied to a man who ended up behind bars for crimes I could barely wrap my head around. In the following weeks, my life underwent a silent renaissance. Freed from the toxic bond, I threw my energy into self-care, friendships, and my career. I got a promotion, ironically around the same time I found out Bennett's official prison sentence. People asked if I was okay, if I was lonely. Sure, I had moments of grief and confusion. How had I missed the signs for so long? But mostly, I felt relief. A few months later, I decided to move to a new apartment, a fresh start. As I packed boxes, I stumbled upon old photos of me and Bennett, smiling on a beach trip years ago. For a moment, I almost felt a pang of nostalgia. Then I remembered the final words he said to me, claiming I was too old, that I'd slow him down. He ended up caged for crimes he committed. I was free and forging a new path. I placed those photos in the trash. Some might keep them for closure, but I had all the closure I needed. A year passed. My life was calmer, simpler. I dated casually, reconnected with old friends, traveled on weekends to see new places. Meanwhile, Bennett counted his days in a prison cell. Occasionally, Jaina or Miriam would update me on the status of appeals or additional charges the FBI uncovered. I mostly tuned it out, focusing on the bright future in front of me. One afternoon, I was at a local farmer's market with Jana, sampling fresh berries when my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I sent it to voicemail. Minutes later, I saw a text. "I'm sorry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed to try. Please write me back. Bennett. He must have gotten phone privileges. I stared at the message, a swirl of emotions threatening to surface. Apology? From the man who turned me into an unwitting accomplice for his shady deals, who left me broken-hearted and tried to hush me with money? Jana peered over my shoulder. Block him, she said firmly. I nodded, pressed the block button. That was that. No regrets. I had already given too much to a man who gave nothing in return. We continued browsing the market, and I found myself smiling at the vibrant produce, the warmth of the late morning sun. This is my life now, I thought. My own, unburdened by manipulative men or illusions of a perfect romance that never was. If there was a sense of triumph, it wasn't the gloating or exultant kind. It was a quiet satisfaction that came from standing up for myself, from refusing to let betrayal define me. The heartbreak had healed into something steadier, self-respect. I realized that sometimes the best revenge is simply taking back your power, letting the person who wronged you face the natural consequences of their own deeds. Bennett's countdown in prison might continue for years, but I no longer lived in the shadow of what he'd done. The man who once called me too old was now locked away, while I was vibrant, alive, tasting the sweet possibility of each new day. And as I watched Jana purchase a bouquet of wildflowers, I allowed myself the smallest smile, knowing that, in the end, I'd walked away with the better deal. My freedom, my integrity, and a future as wide open as the sky above.